To God be the glory.
Welcome back, students, to our study of Biblical Hebrew. Now, you've noticed in their textbook that Lesson 11 on page 65 is review. We've learned a tremendous amount of material. We've studied a lot of things. We've had quite a bit of vocabulary and a number of Hebrew rules, grammar rules, and so forth. And so as a result of that, it's time for us to take a little bit of a breather and go back and review some of the things that we've talked about and we've learned, just to see how good of handle that we have on some of these rules before we proceed. Now, as I've emphasized through the various lessons as we've gone from one to the next, we've talked quite a bit about the importance of making sure that you have these things down. As we go through this review, if there are certain things that we mentioned, because what we're going to be doing in this review is talking about key points. If there are some of these key points that you just don't feel comfortable with, then that's the time to go back and review those things in your book, and maybe even rewind the tape back to the lesson that is dealing with that particular point that you're struggling and wrestling with. Work on that again, and then we can proceed on to lesson number 12. But for right now, let's do a little bit of review. Relax, see how well we've done so far and some of the things that we've learned. All right, it's going to be a little bit difficult for you to read this on the screen if you're too far back from the screen. But nevertheless, it is a camera shot of page number 65 in the book. Important points to remember. First has to do with the main peculiarities of the Semitic language from lesson number 1. 5 basic things that is peculiar to Semitic languages. 1 is the guttural letters. We don't have those things in English. 3 root letters for most verbs. I've been calling that the triliteral root, or the tri meaning 3, the 3 root letters for most verbs, and that's one of the great things of Hebrew, is you can learn what those 3 letters are, and you add to the front of it, to the back of it, and that's okay, as long as you know what those 3 letters are. Also, meaning dependent on forms or pattern of words. That is something that is not too difficult to understand, and we've already learned a little bit of that with the way that we have the adjective and the nouns together. D, pronominal suffixes to nouns, verbs, and prepositions. And even though we haven't got into that very detailed yet, that is something that is peculiar to Semitic languages. And then common basic vocabulary, and that's something that no matter if you're talking about Canaanite or Ugaritic or Aramaic, there are these cognate words, and that's something that's really a blessing. All right, number 2. The following are among the Semitic languages. We've talked about these. We have the Hebrew, the Aramaic, the Ugaritic, the Arabic, Hebrew, Arabic, Ugaritic, Aramaic, Samaritan, Syriac, Phoenician, and Ethiopic. And that's all from lesson number 1. And so as a result of all of these languages, of which we have discovered various parts of those, it has enlightened us and heightened our understanding of studying Hebrew. Of course, to us, Hebrew is the most important because it's got God's holy word in it, and we want to be able to study that and know as much about it as possible. And just as we have been able to uncover God's truths and reveal God's truth through word studies, that's one thing that helps us when we find an Arabic or a Ugaritic word that is similar to a Hebrew word. And that's something that is certainly a blessing. Number 3, the Hebrew alphabet consists of 22 letters, all consonants, no vowels. That's something that is unique to these type of languages. Each letter does have a numerical value, and even though this is not a biblical way of dealing with the words, with the alphabet, but nevertheless they do have a numeric value. What does that mean? Well, Aleph means 1, and Bet means 2, Gimel means 3, and so on. Now, in talking about the 22 letters, we have not mentioned that some of the letters did serve as what are called vowel letters. And I'll just briefly mention these now, and as you study future lessons, we'll be talking about that, but the yod did take sort of an I sound, and the vav did have sort of a V kind of a sound. The H would also have an A type sound. Sometimes that's the way that would be done. And so they did use some of these things with a vowel-like sound, and that's why they're called vowel letters. All right, moving on next to number 5. We have that 5 letters have final forms. All right, and we've talked about that. Reading these 5 letters, we have the Sadi, the Pei, the Nun, the Mem, and the Kaf. From lesson 2, we've learned the final ending forms of that. When that ends a word, it takes a special form. All right, then number 6, something that certainly we've learned by now, and that is that Hebrew is read and written from right to left. If we haven't learned that, then we better go back to lesson number 1 again. All right, then number 7, Hebrew has several scripts, and those used today are the square and cursive, and we're using the square script and are not worried about learning the cursive. Hebrew has 4 guttural letters, and these are in order on the screen: the ayin, the heth, the hey, and the aleph from lesson 5. All right, and we've learned that there are some unique things about those guttural letters. We'll talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Number 9, Hebrew has 5 long vowels and 5 short vowels. All right, let's go to the chalkboard and talk a little bit about these 5 vowels. You also need to remember to learn what these things are called. All right, the short vowels and the long vowels. On the short side, we have the patak. That's what that looks like. Here, I'll do it like this with the box representing any letter. The patak is a line underneath that. Then next, you have the segol. That's the little triangle like that. Then next, you have the short hirik, just a dot underneath there. Then next you have the kibbutz. And then next you have what's called the kametz hatuf that goes underneath the letter like that. And then on the long side you have the kametz. You have the sereh, which you'll recall can take 2 different forms, like that or like that. Once again, these boxes are just any kind of letter that could go there. We're just using the box to represent any kind of a letter. All right, and then you have the long hirik, looks like that. Then you have the shurik that looks like that, and then the O, long O sound, is something that also that goes beyond the letter like that, or it also takes an additional form with just a dot that immediately goes to the left of the letter. Now, the reason that I've done this, and we're taking a little extra time reviewing these, is because you need to learn the corresponding vowels from short to long. Because in future lessons, we've already done this a little bit in the past, but in future lessons, I'll be saying, well, what happens here is it's reduced to the corresponding short vowel. Or I'll say it's strengthened to the corresponding long vowel, or something like that. So you need to understand that if it's being reduced from to the corresponding short vowel, it may be going from a kametz to a patak, or something like that. Or if I say that it's strengthened to the corresponding long vowel, then you know that it's going from this to this. For example, let's go over here a little bit to the left, talking about the definite article, and of course we'll be talking about the definite article in a little bit, is normally like this. Hey, with the potok underneath it. But when it occurs before a guttural letter, like an aleph, say, for example, then it takes the corresponding long vowel, comets. All right, so as a result of that, when we're putting the definite article in front of a guttural, the guttural aleph and ayin and resh, it's going to take the corresponding long vowel for the definite article. All right, so those are some important lessons to learn about the long and short vowels. All right, let's go then to the next page. Talk a little bit about the shava. All right, number 11 there says the shava, which is 2 dots, is used to denote the absence of a vowel. And we've talked a little bit about that and the importance of the shava. But basically it's to try to help us where we can get to these things. When you see the shava at the beginning, it's meant to be not a definite strong E sound, but a quick E and moving on. Number 12, there are 2 different pronunciations. The Sephardi are Spanish and the Ashkenazi are German. And then number 13, the gutturals never begin a word with a shava. Instead, they take a ha top. All right, let's go to the board on this one and talk a little bit about what this means here. All right, once again in your own mind, review what are the gutturals. Okay, aleph, ayin, hey, heth. All right, now the question that we're being asked here is, will we ever see something like, and I'll just make this real big here, will we ever see something like that? Or will we ever see something like this when we're talking about the beginning of a word? Well, the answer to that is no. These are going to take what we're calling not the ha top, but the composite shava. So it could be a potok and a shava, could be a comets and a shava, could be a segol and a shava, and those are the only 3 choices that you'll have. All right, and then also we've learned that the gutturals number 13 and the letter resh do not take a dagesh. None of these 4 letters, and then we'll add resh to that. None of these 4 letters and resh will ever receive that strong dot. You'll never see this, for example, in any of those, except you will this with the hey at the end of a word, and we'll talk about what that means later on. But that's not something that you're going to see. And also there are 2 kinds of dageshes. You have the linne or the weak dagesh, and then you have the doubling or the dagesh forte. All right, let's demonstrate a little bit of what we're talking about. With the word peoples, for example, right there it has a dot in the mem. This would be pronounced how? Meme. This is a dagesh forte right there, called a doubling dot, and that's meaning that we're pronouncing that particular word twice. All right, let's give another example of that. How about the word woman? You remember what the word for woman is? It's got the comate ending there. That also has a dot. All right, this is pronounced ish, shah. Sometimes they add an H on the end of that. Notice we got the SH twice. That's because we've got a dagesh forte in there. We're doubling that particular dot. All right, and then the dagesh linne. The dagesh line is one that doesn't double. Let's take our word king here. Melech. We want to say the king. Then we put the hey followed by a dagesh, and all that does is it just lets us know that that's part of the definite article. But when we look at the what's called the dagesh line, we have our begad kafat. Begad kafat. Begad kafat. Now those are all letters, the 6 letters that receive the dagesh line. These are the only ones that receive the dagesh line. All right, the difference between these with and without the dot all has to do with the pronunciation. But we're only worrying about this one and this one. When we have these particular ones without the dagesh, this has a definite V sound. This one has a definite F sound, whereas this was a P and this was a B. Now, for our purposes, we're not really paying too much attention to this one, although we've been saying that this one would have kind of a TH sound. And every once in a while you hear me mess up a little bit and I'm saying TH, and sometimes I'm saying T, and that's just because I've learned it 2 different ways, and sometimes my brain doesn't know which way it wants to go. But a lot of times I'm leaning a little bit toward TH when the Tav doesn't have a dagesh. All right, but that's something that our book pointed out to us in the beginning, that it sort of goes both ways in modern universities today. All right, so that's what we've learned, and we also learned about how the definite article does have the dagesh in it. So if I was to ask you, what are the 3 things that are a part of the definite article? You should be able to tell me the 3 things. First, it's the letter hey with a patak, followed by a dagesh. 1, 2, 3 things are all a part of the definite article. Now, you say, why is that such a big deal? Well, in future lessons, we're going to learn about what's called inseparable prepositions. That is, prepositions that are a part of the word. And I'll just kind of wet your whistle a little bit with an example. We'll take the word king again. Now, this lamed right here on the beginning of this word means 2 in Hebrew, 2 or 4. Now, if I was wanting to say to a king, then I'd say that, lemelech. But if I wanted to say to the king, I'm going to have this right there. So I have 2 things that tell me that the definite article is there. See, we don't want to put that thing in there all the time if we don't have to. So the Hebrew is not going to say to the king like this. They're not going to do all that garbage. They're going to say, now let's just get rid of this thing altogether and absorb it or show that it was once there by just putting what normally would have gone underneath it and followed it right with the other letters. So that's why it's so important that you remember that the dagesh is a part of the definite article that goes in the letter after the definite article. All right? We've also learned that the sign of the feminine, 2 things. Comets, hey. For example, we were just looking at the word isha. That goes like this, does it not? Isha. All right, there's our comets, hey. And so you learn that that's the sign of the feminine. And then also you see a word that ends in tav. Doesn't make any difference what vowel is before that. That also is going to be feminine. All right? To form the feminine of an adjective, we add the comets hey to the masculine. Also remember that Hebrew is all built upon the masculine. All right, so we'll take the word great here as an example. Gadol. This is the way it looks in the masculine. But we want to talk about a great woman. We add the sign of the feminine onto that. And since we've added something on, we want to hurry up and get to the end. See, that's what Hebrew does. They want to hurry up and get to the end. They don't want to sit there and piddle around dwelling on stuff at the beginning. They want to get to the end, so they don't say Gadol la. They say Gedolah, Gedolah. Move right on, get to the end there. Okay, so that's what we do in adding the feminine onto something. And then we have also learned that an adjective agrees with the noun that it qualifies. All right? We've taken the word man, and we'll say he's an old man. We got ish zaken. All right? Now let's say that we want to make this an old woman. Well, we know that woman is isha. Like that. But that doesn't agree, does it? We've got a woman, an old male right here. So we have to change this like that and make it agree. And that's another lesson that we have learned. All right, so an adjective changes in agreement with the noun that it qualifies. All right. We're getting now down to number 22 here, if you're following me in the book. Before we go on to that, we'll look at one other point. Considering the adjective follows the noun that it qualifies. You notice that we just had, up here on the board, we had a good woman, Isha, Tova. All right? Notice that the adjective is following the noun that it qualifies, and so as a result of that, you remember it is a woman, namely a good one. And if we wanted to put the definite article on it like that, the woman, kind of got those close together, the woman, namely the good one, therefore that would be translated the good woman. All right, let's go back to the page again, and we'll give you a little look on the book of where we're talking about. Number 22 says a definite article is added to the adjective if the noun is definite. For example, you're talking about the old man. You're not just talking about an old man. You're talking or thinking specifically of an old man. And then also number 23, the masculine plural of nouns and adjectives ends in im. All right, once again, let's go back to the board for a minute. Very, very important rule that we're looking at here. We know that the ending of the masculine is the long hierarch final mem. So whenever we have a masculine plural ending, that's what we're going to have. All right, so if I want to say great men, then I'm going to have gay, do, lim, like that. Now, when this happens, just like we were talking about with the feminine, this is changed. Normally the word gadol started out with the comets. When you have a word that begins with the comets and then you add anything on the end of it, whether it's a feminine singular or it's a feminine plural or if it's a masculine plural like we have up here, this is going to be reduced to a shiva, gedolim. Why do we do this? Remember, I just told you. It's because the Hebrew wanted to hurry up and get on, and the shiva is, they're giving it a vowel sound, but they're not giving it much of one. They're just hustling right on down, gedolim, gedolim. So say it quickly, gedolim, get down, not gedolim, gedolim, get down to the end, and that's what the Shavah tells you to do. But this is what we're talking about right here. This is the masculine ending plural. All right, the feminine ending, while we're looking at this, let's just keep our same word here, gadol, word for great. We want to make it a feminine. What's the feminine plural ending? All right, by now you should know that it's holam tav. Holam tav. So gedolot is an example of the feminine. And once again, because we've added something on to the end, we've reduced this to a shavah right there. And that makes that feminine plural. All right, going back to the chart once again, we're looking at number 25, the personal pronouns. All right, it says the personal pronouns are as follows. This is just our very last lesson, and very, very important that you learn these personal pronouns. Ani, meaning I. Ata, that's you masculine. At, that's you singular feminine. Who is he? And he is she. Now, remember, that's kind of a little funny, but that's the way that goes. And then anaknu, that's the word for we. Atem, that's you masculine. Aten, you feminine plural. Him is they masculine. Hen is they feminine. You're talking about a group of women, like women prophets. They, you'd say hen. I'm talking about them in the personal pronoun. Very important that you learn those personal pronouns. All right. Number 26. Segolet nouns are of 2 syllables. The first is accented and the second has a segol. If the second or third letter of the segolet noun is a guttural, the second syllable will have a patak. All right. Let's zoom in on those Hebrew words right there and see what it's trying to tell us here. Now look at the first 3. We got Kerem, Melech, Yeled. All right, those do not have any gutturals, and so all 3 of them have the segols underneath the second letter, and also begins or has the accent on the first. Now look at the second 3. You got a Na'ar, Perach, Zebach. Now, what's different about those? Well, notice that the second letter, for example, in the word Na'ar, that has an ayin, and the ayin is a guttural, and gutturals prefer what vowel? The answer, patak. They prefer the patak, and so that's what you have underneath there. So you still know that that's talking about a segolet noun. All right? And then it also tells us that the plural of the segolet masculine that prefers or follows the exact same pattern, and that pattern is given there on the screen. You have the shavah followed by the comets and then the im ending, and that is the pattern. All right, let's look at some of those examples that right immediately below there, the boy and youth. You've got the word for boy is na'ar, and then it follows that pattern, ne'arim, and then you got the one right below that, you have nachal, but if you want river or wadi, if you want to make it plural, ne'chalim, and so you have the shavah with the comets, and then the masculine plural ending. All right, the word for flower is the next one that you have there, and that's the word perach and perachim. We make flower plural, talking about flowers. All right, going across, looking at these others. The word for boy is yeled, yeladim, is following the exact same pattern. The vowels go exactly the same. The word for sefer is sefarim. And the word for vineyard, cherem, is kerim. And that gives you a good understanding of the segolet nouns. Now, what are the 2 rules on understanding what is a segregate noun. First, it needs to have it be two syllabled words. Second, it needs to have the accent on the first syllable. And actually there's a third rule that goes along with that as well, and that is that you have a segol underneath the second letter. Now, one exception to that is if it has a guttural, it's going to have the patak. All right, now we're looking at the present tense to be. It is not expressed in Hebrew. The words are am and is. They are understood in the context. All right, here is an example. Moses is a man. All right, that'd be Moshe Ish. Where's the word is in that? Well, all I see is Moses and man. But we have to translate or put in there the word for is. Moses is a man. All right, the next one, he is the great prophet. All right, how would we translate that? Who, that means he. Hanavi, the prophet. Hagadol, the great. He, the prophet, the great is how that's translated. He is the great prophet would be the way you translate that, supplying the word is. All right, the next one, you are the king. All right, how would we write that? All right, you got ata, the masculine singular personal pronoun, you, and then hamelech. You are the king. All right, and then one other thing that we'll go to the board to talk a little bit about. It says, note the difference between the following. You have the old man, an old man, which is written like this. Ish Zaken. All right, that's an old man. But if we want to say the old man, we got Ish, Ha, the man, namely the old one. Put that dagesh in there, and that'd be Zaken, like that. All right, you notice that in the book they put their dagesh on the other side of the Zion. That's not important. All right, let's say the man is old. All right, we're talking about a certain man, the man, but we don't want to say the old. We just want to say the man is old. So that's what we do. So here we have an example of three different ways that we can do this. Here we have an old man. The man, namely the old one. The man is old. All right, so those are the three ways that you can look at this. All right, then we have our biblical word list. Number one, important words that you need to understand, because these are words that occur often. And let's just have a little test here. Let's see how well you're doing. I'll write these 4 words on here. All right. Now, do you know what these words mean? I don't have my yod coming out very well right there. These are the first words that are important for us to learn. Man, brother, Adam or man, Adam, Av, father. Key, those are some of our, the first of our important word lists. Now, this is often translated into English AH, whereas this is translated AB. And this can be something that will be easy for you to remember when we're talking about brother. For example, have you remembered seeing in the Bible the name Ahimelech? Ahimelech? Well, this means brother, what does Melech mean? King. This means possessive, so this means my brother is king. Or how about Abimelech? You've heard that word in the Bible, so maybe it's spelled with a K, Abimelech, like that. All right, father, Melech, my father is king. Just like that. So there are some of our key words. And this talks about the male gender. This talks about mankind. All right. You need to review this lesson. Make sure you understand the material that we've covered in the first 10 lessons. If you don't feel comfortable with any or several of these lessons, then let me encourage you to go back, study these before we proceed to future lessons. Always do the exercises, practice those exercises, maybe do them more than once if time allows you to do that. And if you have faithfully followed the instructions that we've given and have done the assignments, then you should be able to do almost all of exercise A that's given there on the bottom of page 68 correctly. Also, let's remind ourselves one more time the importance of staying up with our vocabulary. Make sure that we know the Hebrew to English and the English to Hebrew, and as a result of that, we'll be able to write the Hebrew words with the vowels correctly put in place when we're doing these various words. And by doing that, save yourself an awful lot of time when we're trying to translate from English into Hebrew. You don't have to sit there and say, what on earth is that word that I'm trying to translate in there, and you have to go back and you have to look it up, or you have to see the way it's pointed. Learn these things, and one of the best ways to learn it is by pronouncing it. You learn to say King Melech and Melech. You get the Segol E sounds in there, and so you know how it's pronounced. All right. If these lessons are not clear, then take some time right now and review. And if you feel comfortable with all the things that we have studied, then you'll be ready in just a moment to begin with lesson number 12.